Good morning. It's Wednesday, November 19th, 2014. This is your morning edition on I-24 News. I'm Yael Levi. We begin with the deadly terror attack in Jerusalem yesterday morning. 5 Israelis have been killed, 7 injured, as 2 Palestinians armed with a pistol and meat cleavers attacked a West Jerusalem synagogue yesterday morning. The attackers, Palestinians from East Jerusalem, were shot dead by police. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu ordered authorities to demolish the homes of the 2 assailants' families. The assailants' cousins Rassan and Odey Abu Jamal from the East Jerusalem neighborhood of Jabal Mukaber, who were killed in the shootout with police during the incident. The Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas yesterday condemned the attack, but Hamas praised it. So did several factions within the Palestinian Authority. Important to say, though, nobody claimed responsibility for it. Prime Minister Netanyahu also instructed the expediting of the process to demolish the homes of the Palestinians involved in the attacks, in recent attacks as well, of the embattled city of Jerusalem that has seen a wave of violence persisting through its streets in the last 2 months. In addition, roadblocks supposedly will be put up in the Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem. Let's take a look at what happened yesterday and take it from there.
It took 7 minutes, 5 minutes to slaughter 4 Jewish worshippers and injure 8 others, 2 minutes to shoot dead the 2 Palestinian terrorists, only 7 minutes to kill the hope that calm will be restored to Jerusalem after the tensions of recent weeks. It's morning prayer time. Several dozen Jewish worshippers are in the synagogue. 2 Palestinians from the Arab neighborhood of Jabal al-Mukaber, East Jerusalem, storm into the building. Armed with guns, knives, and axes, they go from room to room, attacking the worshippers. 2 nearby traffic policemen hear the gunshots and rush to the scene. The attackers hear them. They leave the synagogue and open fire at the policemen, who manage to shoot back and injure the 2. Additional forces arrive and kill the terrorist cousins, Russan and Odey Abu Jamal. Only after the terrorists are dead is the scale of horror discovered.
I arrived at the scene and there is still shootings, lots of shootings. At the entrance, a wounded policeman. A bit further, an old man lying on the floor, and inside, blood, lots and lots of blood.
Rabbi Avram Shmuel Goldenberg, Rabbi Moshe Twersky, Rabbi Ari Kupinski, and Rabbi Kalman Levine are all dead. 8 others are wounded, among them 4, including a policeman, in serious condition. It took hours for people to leave the scene and hours for the victims to be buried, with thousands accompanying them on their final journey. Only 7 minutes, and the entire country, still in shock from the morning's events, sinks back to a much darker time.
Important to mention also, as not mentioned in the report, overnight, Jerusalem policeman Ziad Saif, who was injured, fatally injured in the incident, in the terror attack. Ziad Saif, 30 years old, died overnight. Let's first check in with Israeli Chief of Police Mickey Rosenfeld as to the situation in Jerusalem this morning. Mickey, good morning to you.
Good morning.
Now, in terms of what's going on in the city today, extra security and scuffles overnight, correct?
First of all, emphasis on extra police units that are now not just in public areas and not just in East Jerusalem, but also in different neighborhoods as well. That's of the early hours of this morning. Unfortunately, what we confirmed late last night is that the police officer that was shot in the head, unfortunately, passed away of his wounds at 11:30 last night, and unfortunately, he'll be buried today. In general, on the ground, there were no disturbances this morning. We had a number of protests that took place in Jerusalem, the entrance of Jerusalem, that we had to deal with. 23 people were arrested in scuffles and local disturbances, but our main emphasis this morning is stepping up security across Jerusalem in order to deal with the tensions after yesterday morning's attack.
And when it comes to, security measures to be put in place, yesterday Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had a special security cabinet convened. Many things have been said. There's talk also about roadblocks to be put up in the Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem. Would that be like checkpoints? Do we know at this stage? And at what point would that happen?
Well, as you can see, yesterday evening decisions were made by the government, and already the house of the terrorists, which carried out the terrorist attack in Jerusalem just over a week ago, was already destroyed. So immediately what is decided is going to be implemented throughout the day. As far as we're concerned, in coordination with the Jerusalem municipality, both police officers will be in different areas, as well as roadblocks that will be set up. Not in all areas, only in specific areas, and that is necessary to check vehicles, suspicious vehicles, or any potential threat.
I'm just going to go over this with you one more time. So roadblocks, that means in effect like checkpoints within the city?
Not necessarily within the cities or within the Arab neighborhoods. We're talking about roadblocks that will be set up, sporadic police units that will be in different areas to check vehicles that are checked in different areas that wouldn't be expected to be checked. A lot of different police activities taking place across Jerusalem today.
Across Jerusalem. What do we know about the assailants? There's been some reportage yesterday that one of them was working close to the synagogue. Is there any way to even combat that when it comes to intelligence and attacks as such?
Well, there's an ongoing investigation. We know that the two suspects themselves were familiar with the neighborhood. Otherwise, they would have targeted a public area, but they realized and knew that in different public areas there are a much more large number of police officers, so they chose another destination. But we're working on intelligence in order to find potential terrorists and get to them before they manage to get inside the city of Jerusalem.
And Mickey Rosenfeld, thank you for joining us this morning. Obviously, we'll most likely check in with you throughout the day or throughout the week as this situation persists. As mentioned, fighting has broken out between Israeli police and Palestinians in East Jerusalem yesterday following the attack on the synagogue in the western part of the city that, as we mentioned, killed 5 Israelis and the 2 assailants themselves. It is a situation, sadly, that is becoming routine, if not already is routine, in the last 2 months in the city Israel calls its capital, and the Palestinians hope to name it such one day. The wave of violence of sporadic yet persistent terror attacks in and around Jerusalem has not let off, and in the last 2 months, Israeli news outlets are calling it already the new Al-Aqsa Intifada. But rhetoric aside, it's definitely an uprising, and it seems to be a religious one. We are joined in studio by Haaretz senior defense correspondent Amir Oren. Amir, good morning to you.
Morning, Yael.
And by research fellow at the INSS and lecturer at Tel Aviv University, Dr. Benedetta Birdie. Dr. Birdie, good morning to you. And also by former Deputy Foreign Minister to Israel, Dania Yalon. Good morning to you. Well, I'd like to start with, where we're standing right now and what has been said yesterday on the entire political spectrum. But Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu yesterday gave a speech in the evening and had the following thing to say. Let's take a look at what he said after the attack to the people of Israel.
What is disturbing is not only the cruelty of the massacre, but also the cries of celebration from Gaza, Bethlehem, and other places. There, they are handing out candy and waving axes in the air, praising the jihadists. This time, Mahmoud Abbas condemned the massacre, and good that he did. And I also remember that he condemned the murder of the 3 teenagers in June. But that's not enough, because in the rest of the same sentence about the massacre, he connected it to imaginary things that have no truth about what Israel is apparently doing at the Temple Mount. We are in a battle for Jerusalem, our eternal capital. For this battle, we need to come together.
Former Deputy Foreign Minister Dania Yalon, I want to ask you this. These are very strong words. The Israeli Prime Minister saying, we are in a battle over Jerusalem. Isn't it dangerous to basically quantify and qualify this battle as a battle over the religious capital of almost every religion in the world?
No, I guess we have to face directly into reality and to cope with it. This is not the first time that Jerusalem is on the table. It's not the first time that many in the Palestinian camp are trying to convert what is seemingly a national or a territorial conflict into a religious, or I would say even civilizational one. And certainly now we see, either by design or default, design of the Hamas, default of Abbas, they concentrate on Jerusalem. For Abbas, it's very convenient because supposedly the terror is not in the areas under his control. Secondly, it puts again all the emphasis on Jerusalem, and it elevates the Palestinian problem higher up in the international agenda. And of course, Hamas for its own religion and motivations. I think for the Israeli government right now, and I think this is what we see from Netanyahu, is to calm things down. But dealing now with the violence is only dealing with the symptoms. At the end of the day, there won't be any change in the atmosphere, not in the reality, without some kind of a political solution. Another thing, which again, this is the default of the Israeli government now, Jerusalem, unfortunately, is de facto divided. And I think what we see with this wave of terrorism and the countermeasures of the Israeli government is actually deepening this division of Jerusalem. Maybe at the end of the day, this reality of the ground, when there's no leadership, maybe the reality will be carved by events and developments on the ground. We'll have to wait and see. But this is not the first wave of terrorism. Probably it's not the last one. And we'll have to deal with it.
Sadly, that is the case. We're also joined via Skype now by Ashraf Al-Arjami, the former Palestinian minister from Ramallah. Good morning to you, Mr. Al-Arjami.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you for joining us. Do stay with us because we are at the beginning of this discussion. I want to ask actually both Dr. Benedetta Berti and Amir Oren, and you're with us right now, regarding what former Deputy Foreign Minister Dania Yalon just said here. You mentioned Hamas, that this is benefiting Hamas, but Dr. Berti, Hamas is not really responsible for these attacks, are they?
No, I wouldn't say they are. I mean, the pattern here is much more complex in the sense that we've had a number of self-radicalized lone wolf attacks, and that we had attacks with relatively little organizational backing behind it. I mean, from Gaza, there's no question that Hamas has been steering, so to speak, the pot in Jerusalem for their own gains, but this has been mostly through political statements and through their media. So I wouldn't necessarily put direct involvement from Hamas. Certainly, I wouldn't put any direct involvement from the PA. That would be the other part of the puzzle.
No, the other part of the puzzle, and when we say responsibility, the fear is, Amir Oren, and I'm wondering with you out loud, when the Israeli Prime Minister says this is a battle over Jerusalem, the eternal capital of Israel, isn't this actually playing into the hands? I mean, I'm wondering out loud, is this not actually stirring the pot?
Well, almost 50 years after June of 1967, when Israel took control temporarily, but again, almost 5 decades later, temporarily of the occupied territories and annexed only 2 parts of these territories, the Golan Heights and mostly Jerusalem, it turns out that occupation and annexation are not the panacea for Israel's problems, because a new generation of Palestinian youth has risen, and 2 brothers or cousins can sit around the kitchen table. They have not been affiliated with any terrorist organization, but they, for many reasons, decide that very morning to take kitchen knives or cleavers and go out and commit slaughter. And Israel is powerless to stop it, to prevent it, and to take care of it. Jerusalem is today inundated with police. There are thousands of police, 1 policeman for every 100 or perhaps even 80 Jerusalemites. Right. This cannot go on much longer. Israel cannot keep such order of battle in its capital, and the feeling of insecurity is pervasive. Israelis are asking themselves, what next? How can we cope with it? And the only answer is political, and Netanyahu should show leadership enough to call for a summit with Abu Mazen and perhaps with King Abdullah of Jordan, and try to calm the situation by publishing a commitment to preserve the status quo over Temple Mount, which Israeli politicians controlling Netanyahu's party, the Likud, have tried to break or at least to manifest their independence from Netanyahu. And this started a few months ago. The status quo has been preserved, but ostensibly, on the surface, it seems that several Israeli politicians chose this time for their own personal political gain to do it. And Netanyahu should show leadership and not only call on others to perform or stop incitement, but take bold action himself.
Speaking of incitement and people who are gaining from this political capital, as we said, we're joined from Ramallah by former Palestinian Minister Ashraf Al-Arjami. Mr. Al-Arjami, thank you for joining us. I want to ask you the same thing, because yesterday the Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas came out and condemned this attack. It did say, of course, that it is a natural reaction, yet again, to what's going on over Jerusalem. Can the Palestinian president actually stop these acts of violence? Can he not come out and say, don't do this, I'm simplifying this, and why is that not being said?
I don't think so. President Mahmoud Abbas can't stop these kinds of acts because majorly they are spontaneous acts, reactions of the Palestinian in East Jerusalem, which is under the Israeli control. The Palestinian Authority cannot do anything in Jerusalem because they are prevented to do anything, even to collect information there, because it is under fully control of the Israeli government. This is one hand. The other, the Palestinian Authority, even in the West Bank and the other places, has difficulties because of the Israeli procedures. For example, the Israeli soldiers entered the center of Ramallah yesterday, which is something that can embarrass the Palestinian Authority and the Palestinian security services. This is something that the Israeli government must know, because they can maybe make the Palestinian services, the security services, in a very bad situation in front of their people.
Yeah, rightfully so, but you know, the fingers are being pointed from the Israeli government towards, I'm assuming, Daniel, the only person he can blame, you know, towards the Palestinian president, Mahmoud Abbas. But even the head of the Israeli security forces yesterday, the head of the Shabak, actually comes out and says it is not Abbas's responsibility. So what is behind a statement as such? From, you know?
I would say what Mr. Ajami, and of course I think this is what the head of the
Israeli security services
meant, is that technically, right, it's not in area under Abbas control. But this is just technical. Substantially, he is very much responsible, because he could have made, he is the one who influences the public opinion, certainly in the Arab neighborhoods of Jerusalem. So when he calls on a jihad, when he calls on defending Al-Aqsa, and that the Jews are trying to change the status quo, and he knows it's not true. By the way, Netanyahu, as Amir Oren here mentioned, Netanyahu did try to meet with Abu Mazen last week, with Secretary Kerry in Amman, but it is Abu Mazen who refused. For Abu Mazen, I think from a political point of view, it is very, very instrumental to keep the violence in Jerusalem seemingly not in his area, but he's very much responsible, because he can shape the hearts and minds of the people, the Arab people of Jerusalem. And had he been more forceful and more direct in trying to prevent the violence, he could have done much more.
Yeah, but aren't we theorizing, and what is behind his action, Dr. Birdie? You've been shaking your head.
Oh, just mildly, but I would start by saying, well, number one, if we look at popularity poll and we look at what really is driving public opinion in the street, maybe we are slightly giving Mahmoud Abbas a little bit too much credit, in the sense that today does not control the younger generation. By no means does he. So I think there is a disconnect in a way, and I think that disconnect and the vacuum of leadership is really part of the problem rather than the solution. But in addition to that, I would actually go a step further and say this is not just a technical statement about the fact that the Palestinian Authority is not present in East Jerusalem and they cannot deploy their security forces there. I would say that there is something more to that. And if you look at what's happening and you look at the role of Mahmoud Abbas, then I don't think you can really say he's behind this. I think there have been irresponsible statements that, however, I would put on both sides. I think in the past few months there have been provocations from the Israeli side, and there have been unfortunate statements that have also contributed to escalate the tension from the Palestinian side. But when you look at what's happening on the ground, part of the reason why the West Bank has been quiet is not just there haven't been large-scale attempts, but it's also there is an ongoing collaboration between the Palestinian security services and the Israeli one. A collaboration that neither side is too happy to openly acknowledge, but that is part of the reason why the West Bank is the way it is, and that means that there is a political.
And in East Jerusalem, there are no Palestinians.
There are no Palestinians, and East Jerusalem is a completely different beast, so to speak, because East Jerusalem has been developing politically in a different way from the West Bank. They're also isolated. East Jerusalem has been suffering the consequences of the barrier of the security fence. East Jerusalem lacks the centralized leadership to speak for residents of East Jerusalem. All these factors, when you put them together, they tell you that we're talking about two very different environments, and that's also why it is so hard. And I'll go back in the initial statements. How do we stop this? It's not so easy to stop a self-radicalization. It's not so easy to stop lone wolves attacks. All you can do is really a law enforcement approach, which is putting a plaster on a wound, not addressing it. And then I just want to finish by saying, to address it, you have to tap into the widespread sense of frustration, the widespread sense of political hopelessness. In other words, I think you have to deal with the political issue.
I'm not smiling because, you know, actually, I think the one thing that everybody's trying to say to the politicians, but even they are not even are manifesting that in their thoughts. You wanted to say?
Yes, 2 points, please, Yael. One is that many secular Israelis resent the fact that they are being drawn into a new confrontation by the decision of religious Israelis and religious politicians, mainly, to start a new battle over Temple Mount. Many secular Israelis respect the right of their religious brethren to pray in holy places, but nevertheless, the religious Israelis should also be mindful of the consequences of what they do. And the other point is that 10 or 12 years ago, Israel was very proud, even boastful, of its decision to close down Orient House and the Palestinian establishments in East Jerusalem under people like Faisal Husseini and other local leaders. And the result is the same vacuum that we just heard about, that there is no political leadership for the Israeli residents, because they are residents of Israel, even though they are not citizens. The Palestinians who are resident in Israel, but are not represented by Mahmoud Abbas or by Netanyahu, obviously, and have no one to turn to.
And that might, you know, causing the frustration that we're seeing on the ground right now. But Mr. Larjami from Ramallah, former Palestinian minister, is there an understanding, and I'm going to ask this everybody who sits here with me this morning, is there an understanding within the Palestinian Authority, do you believe, that the escalation, the current escalation in Jerusalem is actually turning the conflict between Israel and Palestine to a religious one rather than a territorial one? Because that seems to be what has been happening over the last month and a half, a religious conflict rather than a territorial one.
It will be very dangerous if this conflict be a religious one, because if it will be a religious, it will be a conflict without any option to reach an end of this. I think until this moment we can't speak about religious conflict. There are religious factors of this conflict, but until this moment it is a political one. The Palestinian Authority couldn't do anything to change the situation in East Jerusalem. All the time they tried to urge the Israeli government to stop its policy in East Jerusalem, especially the provocations of the extremist factions in Israel, even people who are in the Prime Minister party, like Moshe Begin and others. Yeah. Their visits, and also there are a very bad situation, economical and social situation for the youth in East Jerusalem. We are speaking about a high percentage of unemployment. This is something that can also affect negatively the situation and make people do these acts without feeling that they can lose anything.
No, rightfully so, and yes, frustration puts people out in the streets, but you know, when we're looking at this conflict taking this religious tones, not even tones, and once again to you, Dani Ayalon, former Deputy Foreign Minister, do you believe that there is an understanding in the current establishment, and possibly in the Foreign Minister, because we know where, you know, Victor Lieberman's, you know, where his agenda lies, but within the coalition, people like Naftali Bennett coming out saying that we have to own Jerusalem. Then the Prime Minister, I'm sorry, I have to go back to that, calling a battle over Jerusalem. This is turning it into a religious conflict. How does one pull out of it afterwards?
Well, the only thing is, first of all, you have to beef up security. I mean, this is a very symptomatic, but right now, this is the urgent matter to do.
But statements like that, Mr. Ayalon.
Yeah, but on the other hand, you know, when he says the status quo is going to be maintained, he said it to Kerry, he said it to King Abdallah, he said it here to Israeli public opinion as well. So I think there is here an incitement by saying, you know, whether it's the Hamas or even Abu Mazen, saying that the Jews are in a way soiling the ground of Al-Aqsa. They are the ones who are trying to turn it into there is no whatsoever interest of Israel, not of Netanyahu, to turn it into a religious confrontation. But on the other hand, I think he has to say what is really the Palestinians are focusing. Once they focus on Jerusalem, then of course there's going to be a countermeasure by Israel. And I do not think that it's Abu Mazen alone. It's the entire culture. It's not that Abu Mazen is really having a direct, let's say, influence with the youth of East Jerusalem, but it's the PA, it's the networks, it's everything with a culture that is
or maybe it's
hateful.
disregarding, you know, the situation that we're in within the Middle East. And Dr. Birdie, I want to ask you, because the modus operandi that we saw yesterday in the synagogue, meat cleavers, I mean, it's very, you know, it's Daesh-y. It's almost ISIS-y in a way, you know, and that's what some people are saying. Is this something that, you know, needs to be taken? Okay, Amir, do you chime in?
We are here. We are here in Jaffa, just a few kilometers down the road here. In 1992, a young woman from Bat Yam, the adjoining neighborhood, Helena Rapp, was murdered in the same way. She was stabbed. One shouldn't see into the method of murder, of slaughter, of this terrible killing, more than there is to it. It's very hard to come by weapons, handguns or rifles, even though they did have some. So using tractors or other vehicles or knives is the weapon of choice for these people.
The weapons of choice, which goes to the point that, you know, it's impossible to combat, sadly, all the time. We have real quick.
Real quick, and I just wanted to agree, in a way, this is back to the beginning. The very first violent campaign of Hamas was a stabbing campaign. No, rightfully said. Do stay with us, as we said, taking a look at the very tenuous situation in Jerusalem, in the Middle East, after a deadly attack yesterday in a synagogue, killing 5 people. Stay with us. I-24 News, Morning Edition. We'll be right back. Good morning, I-24 News Morning Edition, special edition, as we cover the day after the deadly, heinous attack in a synagogue in Jerusalem in which 5 people were killed. Names were released Tuesday afternoon of the 5 victims, 3 of them dual U.S. Israeli nationals, 1 is a British Israeli citizen. And of course, overnight, the policeman, whose name was, Ziad Saif, a 30-year-old policeman, killed overnight by his wounded, murdered in the terror attack at the synagogue in the Jerusalem neighborhood of Har Nof. Of course, this is coming on the heels of a month and a half of a wave of violence that has been hitting Jerusalem, that has been very hard to combat. As mentioned, it's being already referred to in Israeli outlets as the Al-Aqsa Intifada. Let's take a look at the timeline of events in Jerusalem over the course of the last 2 months.
We are deeply concerned by this decision, particularly given the tense situation in Jerusalem.
Prime Minister Netanyahu strongly reaffirmed Israel's commitment to uphold the status quo on the Haram al-Sharif, Temple Mount.
We're also joined in studio by Ali Waked, Senior Middle East analyst for I-24 News. Amir Oren still with us, of course, Haaretz Senior Military Defense Analyst, and Tony Grant, our one and only Tony Grant, with a review of the press about this incident that we'll take a look at in a short while. Ali Waked, I want to start with you. Jerusalem. You and I have been sitting here discussing, I've tried to ask that also from former Deputy Foreign Minister Dani Ayalon. This is becoming, everybody's, saying that this is a dispute that's no longer territorial, that this has taken a religious tone in Jerusalem, and that's the most dangerous thing for this conflict. Is there a possibility, actually, a capability of the Palestinian Authority to stop what's going on in Jerusalem right now when it comes to this wave of attacks by Palestinian civilians?
Well, I must understand, why is this question? What is the role, the official role of the Palestinian Authority in East Jerusalem? And I mentioned it yesterday, Yael, during the Olmert government and the government that were before the Olmert. Israel allowed the Palestinian Authority to operate discreetly and without uniforms in the Arab neighborhoods of East Jerusalem and the villages surrounding, like Jabal al-Mukaber, surrounding Jerusalem. And since Netanyahu came to power, these understandings between PA and Israel were gone, and the Palestinian Authority has no place in East Jerusalem. On the contrary, we know that because of the situation of the Palestinians in East Jerusalem, the representatives of Jerusalem in the Legislative Palestinian Council are 4 Hamas members. 4 from 4 are Hamas members, which show the gaps between the Palestinian community in East Jerusalem and the majority and the Israeli establishment. But the Palestinian Authority warned more than once that the discourse and the situation is going towards a religious discourse, towards a religious conflict. The fact that mosques and churches were aggressed and attacked in Jerusalem and elsewhere in the West Bank, and not a list of indictment against one or those who attacked the holy sites of Muslims and Christians. And just to mention, I saw the chronology in the report. There was no mention of the fact that it is true that the killing of Muhammad Abu Khdeir, this teenager from East Jerusalem, came after the killing in Gush Etzion of 3 Israeli youngsters. But the Palestinians are waiting. What are the sanctions that the Israeli authorities will take against those 3 suspected Israelis who killed Muhammad Abu Khdeir? Will their house be demolished as the house of the Palestinian who carried out the attack in the tramway in East Jerusalem?
This is a very important point because of the double standard that Israel subjects the world actually to. Because Israel wants to portray whatever happens in Jerusalem as a domestic, internal problem. Jerusalem is the capital of Israel. It is under Israeli sovereignty, at least in Israeli eyes. The world has not recognized it. But nevertheless, what happens in Jerusalem must say in Jerusalem it's Israeli. And if Israelis are now on trial for this murder, there is a due process of law. They were indicted. If they are convicted, they will be sentenced, and so on and so forth. When it comes to Palestinians, there is a very summary justice. Within a few hours, not only their own houses, but the houses of their relatives are being demolished. And Palestinians look at it and ask themselves, is this law enforcement, or is this security, or is this politics? And this double standard must stop. If demolishing houses is really considered a deterrent, it must be fairly implemented to all.
No, that's a point that I think we've been hearing as Ali made valid to the point of the people of Jerusalem, but we're hearing also of another modus operandi that supposedly Prime Minister Netanyahu mentioned in the cabinet yesterday, and that would be in trying to combat this violence that's going on in Jerusalem, roadblocks, which sound like checkpoints, which will be put outside the.
It is checkpoints.
It's checkpoints,
right?
But the question is, how far back does Netanyahu want to go? To the Jordanian occupation of East Jerusalem, to the British mandate, where there were roadblocks?
No, I know, but other than the history, if it is checkpoints, I mean, if they're putting checkpoints for the Arab citizens of East Jerusalem, isn't that something that's going to stir the pot even more?
By the way, I want to mention, Yael, checkpoints, not the physical checkpoints, but when you owe money to any Israeli authority, you are asked to come to court if you don't pay. In East Jerusalem, they are on daily basis checkpoints of the police to check IDs, whether you owe money or you don't owe money to the Israeli, any kind of authority. So this double measure, the people in Jerusalem, and I mentioned it more than once, Palestinians in West Bank and in Gaza were very much frustrated by the fact that the Palestinians in Jerusalem did not join the first Intifada and the second Intifada as everybody expected.
So they're starting their own Intifada.
Exactly, and the Israelis wasted the opportunity to according to their vision, that the 300,000 Palestinians in East Jerusalem are Israeli citizens or inhabitants, they waste the opportunity to integrate them in the association. If we look at Jaffa, where those who throw stones over the Israeli tramway in East Jerusalem, this is a refugee camp that is not different from any refugee camp in the Gaza Strip. And when we see now in the TV on the borders between Turkey and Syria, a little bit more sophisticated. So there were no really coexistence between Arab and Jews in East Jerusalem. The Israelis tried to impose the system over 300,000 that didn't want. Like, for example, there is a whole discourse now in East Jerusalem because the Ministry of Education is trying to change the educational curriculum in East Jerusalem from the Jordanian Palestinian one to the Israeli one, unilaterally, without any dialogue with the community in East Jerusalem. We are talking about two different communities with a cultural, political, historical, religious gaps, and the only tool that the Israeli establishment want to deal with is the security tool. No word yesterday about any political horizon to this very complex situation in East Jerusalem.
By the way, when you talk to police in Jerusalem, they are doing the job as they were commissioned to do, they are resentful of the fact, the thin blue line, right, so to speak, that other governmental agencies or City Hall have been neglecting East Jerusalem, and the police, are left to deal with the consequences and to suppress whatever violence emerges from the reaction to years of neglect.
I think that it's indicative that East Jerusalem has blown up. I mean, if you think about it, the one thing that usually blows up, if it was the Oslo Accords or any type of negotiation, is that there can't even be a sit-down to discuss the future. And this is, almost disregarding that there are people living there at this point. They are basically rising up.
And I want to tell you more, Yael. Do you know that if both of us are citizens of East Jerusalem and we have a civil difference, we can present it in front of a Palestinian court, and the decision of a Palestinian court is obliging the Palestinian in East Jerusalem, like exactly it is elsewhere. It is for Israeli court for Israeli citizens. So right, the Palestinians voluntarily decided they are part of the Palestinian system. It is true that there are some cases where the Palestinian court decided X, and a Palestinian decided I'm an Israeli citizen. They can do whatever they want, but he cannot go to the West Bank. He might be arrested even in East Jerusalem. Did you know that there are tens of East Jerusalem citizens who were arrested and taken to the Palestinian jail in Ramallah and in Jericho? So the Palestinians decide that we want a solution, and the solution is not changing unilaterally and deciding that we are part of the eternal Jewish capital. There are 300,000 100,000 people here that have a say, and their say must be taken into consideration, because we are seeing, Yael, if the Palestinian Authority was the main player in the in East Jerusalem and the Fatah, etc., in the last year it was Hamas that was taking the place of the Palestinian Authority, and the Palestinian Authority is no more sure that Hamas is still the alternative for the PA, and if not the Salafist group who are operating in East Jerusalem. It is enough to go to the mosques in Jabal al-Mukaber, in At-Tur, in Aram, etc., to see the figures of the people who are in the streets, in the mosques, to understand that there was already a turnover from the pragmatic Fatah secular PA to Hamas, the pragmatic part of the political Islam, to the Salafist group, and nobody in Israel is giving the answer why.
Why? No, I mean, the frightening thing about this is also that, you know, if one is pushing us away, the faction that is actually, not Hamas, but Abu Mazen, and, and calling that, and saying that this is incitement and this is directly the result of his actions, then you're actually strengthening the side that, that you don't want to negotiate with. I'm talking about Hamas.
Yesterday, Abu Mazen was in good company when the right wing in Israel accused Abu Mazen and the chief of the Shabak for,
Yeah, for everybody is to blame. But do stay with us, because we are here with Anthony Grant. And the interesting bit about this, interesting is maybe the wrong word to say, but this heinous last attack in a wave of violence. Clearly, this has been the toughest attack in Jerusalem. 5 people dead, has gotten an immediate response, more so than any other attack in Jerusalem over the course of the last 2 months, from the international press. Right. And we have seen a trickling of, when you and I sat here yesterday morning, of everybody covering this. This is jumping to the top of the agenda. And then the battle of words began. And what were the headlines about this attack in Jerusalem around the world yesterday?
Well, listen, if you want to start with, well, of course, there were some erroneous inaccuracies in various headlines, right. and some would say biases, which were actually quickly picked up on both in Israeli media and internationally. For example, in television, we had a CNN headline, which, of course, one of them mistakenly identified the synagogue as a mosque initially.
Right.
That was fixed, but of course the internet caught it, so there was that going around. Also, we had something, I guess, on their website which said had headline 4 Israelis at the time. Well, it was 4 now, as we know it's 5. 2 Palestinians killed in a synagogue attack, and there was a lot of reaction to that, saying we had actually Michael Oren, the former Israeli ambassador to the U.S., sort of calling out CNN and saying, "Are you serious? How would Americans respond to headline 3,000 Americans and 19 Arabs killed at 9/11?" So you have the whole question of what are some journalists thinking in terms of the language of the headlines. Is it reflecting the situation on the ground?
for Duham. To be correct, we have to say that Michael Oren actually used to work for CNN not too long ago. He was one of their commentators. But to see it, I mean, I thought his response on Facebook was stellar. That, if 9/11, 3,000 Americans and 17 Saudis died, it's that type of Duolingo.
But the factual problem was that the bus driver, who was found dead, and whether he committed suicide or was murdered a day earlier, this made CNN and other media outlets worry of trying to assign blame before it is known.
No, I have to disagree there, because if you look at a headline, say from, I have the Washington Post, which basically has it, the Palestinian attackers stormed Jerusalem synagogue, killing 3 Americans, 1 Briton. That's journalism. That's what happened. You had a storming of a synagogue, a holy place. It's not this sort of limp-wristed, passive headline. It's action. It's what happened. And so Michael Oren is saying, at least just put the facts in place. You don't have a bias in the headline when you just report the facts. And I think people across the board were just saying, what the hell, pardon my expression, happened here? Just give us the facts, keep the bias for the op-ed page. And this was rippling across headlines, whether it was the LA Times, the New York Times was a little bit on the passive side, Wall Street Journal more sort of the language of brutal attack.
The language of it. We also, the language of, and as you said, and rightfully so, the facts, report the facts, because it's always, there was one point of a terrorist attack in quotation marks. There was another thing.
Some headlines made it seem like the synagogue itself made the attack. I mean, now we know across the board, standards of language have fallen, internationally. So, to a certain extent, you can't pinpoint one individual journalist for making a mistake, but editors need to pay more attention, because what happens is when you have a situation that is so freighted on so many sides, the Arab world, the Jewish world, Journalists have got to get the facts
I'd like
straight.
to make it, to parallel this also, that politicians have to be really careful and also, watch what they're saying in several speeches.
Yeah.
But also joining this discussion, everybody's staying here, is Jonathan Thatcher-Dowdy from London, I-24 News European correspondent. Stay with us, Jonathan, because we're going to look at some headlines and how this was covered. And I'm wondering out loud also how this fuels the actual conflict on the ground. But what other headlines did we have?
Well, we had, the fact that we had that the American victims, basically, or American dual citizenship and British, helped this rise to the top of the headlines as well. You have the Times of London, sort of Britain killed in brutal Jerusalem synagogue attack, not even mentioning the Americans, in that, at least in one of their initial headlines, which is understandable. People are looking at this from afar thinking it's bad enough if it's sort of locals, but international dual citizenship people that, of course, does implicate having to involve the authorities of those countries, the FBI, for example, jumping in on an investigation. The international dimension is something that you see played out.
You see played out. What other headlines?
We had, let's see, the Los Angeles Times I mentioned, very basic headline: 3 of 4 killed in Jerusalem synagogue were Americans. Again, focusing on the nationalities. The condemnations: Times of Israel, Obama very swift to condemn the horrific attack as victims laid to rest. And Jerusalem Post, interesting article. Shin Bet chief says Abbas does not encourage terrorism, contradicting Netanyahu. So very soon after the blame game started, you had someone within the Israeli security administration downplaying the blame game.
I wanted to touch on that a little bit with you, with Amir Oren here from Haaretz, senior defense analyst. A statement as such from the head of the security service, I think we've touched on that enough. This is quite, shattering, isn't it? Shattering to the Prime Minister's agenda and a narrative that Abbas is to blame. Abbas is the one sending them. Here comes the head of the security and goes, actually, no.
Well, only a week ago, the same Shin Bet chief was involved in a debate or even a public confrontation with his military counterpart, the chief of staff of the Israeli Defense Forces, over factual arguments, whether his service, the Shin Bet, supplied the government and the military with certain facts. Now comes the same chief to the Knesset Committee on Defense and Foreign Affairs and is asked a factual question. He cannot evade it by speaking like a politician, saying that incitement causes or inspires. He must bring, or at least must be equipped with facts that he gathers from the ground, that his staff prepared. He cannot just lie and say, yes, Abu Mazen's incitement caused it. And from his information, which is not only a collection of intelligence, but also the collaboration of Palestinian security services with his very organization, he knows that this is not true. There was no way for him to support Netanyahu's contention just to be politically correct.
Yeah, an interesting point on that. Jonathan Thatcher-Dowdy also with us as we're looking at headlines at this part of the show. Jonathan from the UK. I want to touch with you a little bit because we had that statement coming out against the Israeli Prime Minister and from within the Israeli administration. But when we're looking overseas, as Tony mentioned, how this has been covered, there's been places around the world that haven't even touched it. And I think Spain took a certain decision to just cover, the talk and the discussion about voting for a Palestinian state unilaterally.
Well, that's right. The coverage of this across Europe, and particularly here in the United Kingdom, really depends on what newspapers you like to read. If you're favorable towards Israel, then you tend to read press that is favorable towards Israel. And if you're not, you tend to read the other press accordingly. And so we could see here that even with simple things like the use of the word terror, the press was not united and the media did not have a united front as to how they assessed this particular brutal attack. Despite the use of meat cleavers, despite the killing of people whilst praying, the BBC maintained their policy of never using the word terror except in quotation marks and saying that Israel claimed it was terror or Israeli police called it a terror attack. Even once we had Barack Obama or John Kerry declaring this quite definitively as a brutal terror attack, the BBC persist in that particular line of reporting. Similarly, The Guardian, which only a few days ago carried on its website a long article justifying Hamas and arguing that its charter was not in fact in any way problem for the State of Israel, despite its genocidal intent. It carried this article by Ahmed Youssef, a Hamas official, and it was really a whole screed about Hamas and how the West is obsessed with demonizing the organization of Hamas, which is, quote, simply a movement resisting occupation and besiegement. So, on the other hand, there was the Daily Mail here and other newspapers like that, and the Times, which have concentrated on the human tragedy here. Right. So we saw in the Times a nice long piece about the British rabbi, as you mentioned there, 68-year-old, who was killed in this attack, and his history in the United Kingdom, interviews with his family here and the like. So really a mixed bag across the media here and across the political spectrum of opinions as well.
A mixed array, and I'm wondering actually, Ali Walker, I was just thinking that one of the things that we haven't looked at this morning, we haven't discussed, is how this is being picked up in the Arab press.
Minimally. Sorry to answer for you there.
It was not minimally, but the description of the attack was like based on 4 or 5 Israeli killed in an attack in Jerusalem, and the 2 attackers were killed. This was a fact, and of course, the focus was on the fact that this attack was a response to precedent incidents that took place in East Jerusalem, like the bus driver and the situation in the Temple Mount Haram al-Sharif.
When I say minimally, I just want to step in. We're talking front page news, British dailies, even some European, some French and American, of course, but in the Arab press, largely absent from, I would say, front page headline coverage. We're talking like below the fold. At least that was at about approximately the same time that you had the front page headlines emerging on New York Times, Washington Post, etc.
Right, this is not a huge surprise. A print electronic problem, because in the TV yesterday it was during the morning until the evening it opened most of the news editions in all the TV channels.
Print, but
but still, I think it goes to show also, for example, with the Palestinian bus driver in East Jerusalem, that's something that I have to mention. I have to say I did not know when I walked in yesterday morning. I didn't know it from the Israeli media. That was something that was an issue in play, that the Palestinians would believe that the Israelis actually killed him, that there's an autopsy, etc., etc. But it's interesting to see the play across the board with the fact that it's almost like the city itself. I mean, you were beginning to say.
There is a difference between writers and readers. For us in the news business, working in a continuous news cycle, we believe that each item is very important. For the viewer or for the reader, there are many incidents and accidents every day all over the world. People are fed up with such mundane news. And when Israelis are killed in an avalanche in Nepal, of course it's big news in Israel, but the dozens of other people who are killed are not. When a British dual citizen is killed in Jerusalem, is murdered in Jerusalem, it's news in London. It may not be so in France.
And also just to mention, there does seem to be, at least in some of the New York papers, an uptick in aggression and assault against some Orthodox Jews in New York City, as security's been beefed up at synagogues in New York. Reportedly, there was a report from the New York Post that an Orthodox rabbi was assaulted at a subway platform, never a good place to be on the best of days, somewhere in Brooklyn. And this was Monday afternoon, so it was before this attack. And of course, but again, a few days ago, someone actually, I think a Chinese person, was pushed in front of a subway. So of course, there's horrible news all the time. But are we going to see an uptick in these anti-Semitic
assaults? That's the question, and I think that the problem with, and Ali, also I'm wondering out with you, when we see it, and for Israelis and for the other side, we can equate this when you see these bloody, horrific pictures from within a synagogue, but which go to the core of the religious belief of the people of Jerusalem. And I think the same thing goes when you see, for Palestinians, correct me if I'm wrong, when they see soldiers on Temple Mount / Haram al-Sharif, because we keep calling it Temple Mount. It's called differently, right, for the Palestinian population.
Yesterday when I talked to people and tried to focus on the humanitarian issue, that they were praying, innocent, not
civilians,
armed, from the ultra-Orthodox community, that most of them are not serving in the army. As you mentioned, the first instinct question was, but 2 weeks ago, boots were on the ground. inside the Temple Mount, inside the mosque for the first time since 1967. And this is the thing that is worrying the Palestinian Authority, that the whole discourse is turning from a territorial, political one to a religious one. And in this religious field, the Palestinian Authority lose place for Hamas and more Islamic organizations.
It's bad enough for Israel that there is a Palestinian-Israeli conflict within an Arab-Israeli conflict, but if hundreds of millions of Muslims from Indonesia to Pakistan were to believe that Israel is waging war against one of its holiest sites, woe be it to Israel.
No, or as we say,
and one small note, by the way, the Palestinian Authority embassy is trying to calm the Muslim communities in the world that it is not a religious conflict, and the pictures are embarrassing the Palestinian Authority, showing the conflict as a religious one, and Hamas is accusing the diplomatical corps of the Palestinian Authority of trying to calm the situation and to describe it as not as it is going on the ground.
Well, all I can say is God save us all if this becomes just a religious conflict, so to speak. Ali Wakid, Tony Grant, Amir Olam, thank you for being with me this morning. When we get back, an interview with Knesset Minister, Likud member Moshe Feiglin. Do stay with us. I-24 News Morning Edition. Welcome back. It is still Wednesday, November 19th, 2014. This is still the morning edition. Last I checked, I'm still Yael Levi, and thank you for staying with us. We are, as we mentioned, a day after the heinous, deadly attack in Jerusalem in which 5 people were killed. 2 Palestinian assailants, enter a synagogue and slaughter people who were praying inside. A policeman dies afterwards in a hot pursuit, obviously after the assailants, where they were gunned down. We are taking a look at this conflict that is basically spiraling out of control, according to some, and joined in studio this morning by Israeli parliament member, Minister Moshe Feiglin from the Likud party. Thank you for joining us this morning.
Thank you.
Before we start, we have been talking over the course of the first hour of the show how the danger of this conflict is that it is taking a very, an almost only religious tone between Israel and the Palestinians. Let's take a look at the following report as to where this is heading and break it down from there.
Jerusalem, the holy city where a synagogue, mosque and church can allegedly coexist in harmony, has been plunged into turmoil in recent months. While the main question on the table is whether the current series of Palestinians' terror attack is a part of a third uprising or intifada, another question sneaks under the radar. Is this a war of religion? The synagogue in the western Jerusalem neighborhood of Al-Nof was a definite religious target for the attack on Tuesday, where 4 Jewish civilians were murdered and 8 wounded. 2 weeks ago, the Palestinian who drove a car into Israeli soldiers was inspired by partially distorted reports about the confrontation between police and Muslim worshippers at the Al-Aqsa Mosque, a clear religious motive. Israeli politicians are pointing a finger at Mahmoud Abbas, the president of the Palestinian Authority. Avigdor Lieberman, Israeli Foreign Affairs Minister, said Abbas has deliberately turned the conflict into a religious conflict between Jews and Muslims. He added that the Palestinian leader's incitement, including his statement that impure Jews may not enter the Temple Mount, provides the guidance for such heinous attacks. However, Abbas condemned the killing.
We of course condemn such incidents. We do not accept under any circumstances the attack on innocent civilians. And I would also like to stress that I condemn everything that is happening in the Temple Mount and the holy sites in Jerusalem.
With that said, the same Abbas also sent a condolences letter to the family of the terrorist who was killed after he attempted to murder Rabbi Yehuda Glick, an activist who campaigned for allowing Jews to pray at the Temple Mount, a site holy to Muslims and Jews. So is Jerusalem a microcosm of the larger international clash between religions? Can recent terror acts be viewed only as a result of the political territorial Israeli-Palestinian conflict? The war of religion argument does not flatter the Palestinians since it lumps them with the same camp as the IS, Al-Qaeda, or the Taliban. But it's a useful weapon when needed. In a speech that marked the 10th anniversary of the death of Yasser Arafat, Abbas accused Israel of leading the region toward a religious war. Israeli politicians are also keen to play this card.
They will not succeed. Even the attempt by extreme Islamist groups to further inflame existing tensions, to ignite a religion war, this attempt will not succeed as well.
Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu has a pretty decisive stand regarding the war of religion question. After all, he is the one who coined the phrase branches of the same poisonous tree.
We're joined in studio by the Israeli parliament member, Minister Moshe Feiglin from the Likud party. Mr. Feiglin, good morning to you. You and I had a chance to chat on the phone yesterday during the information about this heinous attack in Jerusalem came about, and you said that this is the time for Prime Minister Netanyahu to come out flatly yesterday or today and announce that Jerusalem is under Jewish sovereignty. Do you still believe that's the case?
Of course.
Why? I mean, doesn't that put us at war with Jordan as well?
Israel have to decide. We, the Israelis, have to decide. Is Jerusalem is still our capital? Is the Temple Mount belongs to the Jews or to the Arabs? I guess we got to the point where we cannot run away from that decision anymore. The fact that we're living in a place and we leave it without clear sovereignty pulls in all these forces that trying to all these terrorist forces and increase the violence. I think, and I wrote in my Facebook page just a morning before the slaughter, this horrible slaughter in the synagogue in Jerusalem, just 24 hours before, I wrote that the fact that Prime Minister Netanyahu ran twice to King Abdullah in Amman as a result of different shooting and attempt to killing Jews in Israel sent a message that encouraged terrorism, and we'll see very soon more acts like that. And it took less than 24 hours that exactly what I understood is going to happen because of this way of behaving of the Israeli leadership.
But that is, I mean, it is no secret, it's actually a fact that the Temple Mount is under custodial, also under custodial responsibility and, you know, ownership, if one wants to say, of the Jordanians. You know, that's something that has been agreed upon, you know, in political and documents that have been signed.
Nothing of what's going on today in the Temple Mount was agreed on. I think it was a terrible mistake, a mistake that has to be fixed. The fact that Jews cannot pray in the holiest place to the Jewish people, in the place where our first temple and second temple stood almost 1,500 years before Muhammad was even born, is ridiculous.
But is there an understanding?
However, even those who are talking about status quo are not saying the truth. The status quo was... What?
How so? Yeah.
Because the status quo was that Jews can go up to the Temple Mount, not praying, unfortunately, to our shame, but still can go whenever they want, in any quantity, in any amount they want. Definitely not suffer from what they're suffering today on the Temple Mount. All we are talking about right now is keeping the status quo. Those who are destroying the status quo and starting a religious war are the Arabs, the Muslims, not the Jews.
But is there an understanding from people, you know, like yourself, that have such strong feelings towards Temple Mount, rightfully so, because religion, you know, invokes strong feelings, that the other side, the Palestinian side, that views Temple Mount, as it calls it, a Haram al-Sharif, that views it as also their holy place, and that when they see Israeli soldiers on that ground that is sacred to them, whether you agree with it or not, that will stir up the same type of emotions and animosities as it does on the Jewish side.
So it's about time that somebody will understand, and I'm not talking about the Jews who understood it all the time, that either they can at least live with both sides in peace, or yes, we are at war. And there's a third option as well. We can just run away from Jerusalem. But let me tell you something. If we run away from the Temple Mount does not belong to us. Jerusalem does not belong to us. And also, Jaffa, where we're sitting right now, does not belong to us. So the first barricade to the Jewish sovereignty on the entire land starts at the Temple Mount. And we cannot decide to give up on that basic. We as a Jewish people, as a Jewish nation, cannot give up on that.
The question, though, remains that if this conflict, because, I mean, and you can agree with me or not, but it's no secret that this conflict over the course of the last several years has been a territorial conflict. If it moves to passages of religion, as we're seeing the entire region fighting over whose religion is bigger, whose religion is stronger in many, many ways, doesn't it pose a danger that there will never, ever be any type of sit-down negotiations and that two peoples are never going to reach a conclusion of being able to live next to each other? Because nobody's going away.
You know, you're wrong, and I'm not blaming you, because this is the assumption, but it's false.
Why?
It was never about territory. It was always about religion. The 100 years of conflict here in the land of Israel was never about territory. For example, did you ever hear about a claim to a so-called Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria when Jordan controlled these territories? Once? Can you quote one what you call Palestinian figure who said to the Jordanians before 67, let's create a land over here? I know that all the Arabs tried to attack the small Jewish state few times before 67. They never needed the Temple Mount to slaughter Jews. They did it before 67 as well. They did it in 1929, they did it in 1936, they didn't after the creation of the Jewish state. It is not about territory. It is about religion. The source of the conflict is religion. And let me tell you something, not only in Israel, also in London. So we can run away from the fact that, or from the real deep religious sources of the conflict. It's not going to solve the problem. Only if we face the truth and we understand the source of the conflict, we can start deal with it and achieve peace. If we're going to lie to ourselves, peace we're going to get. We're not going to get from it.
Peace is it? Achieving, getting to the source of the issue. If it is religion, then what type of peace do you envision?
Many Arabs, Israeli Arabs, coming to me to the Knesset, talking to me, including Knesset members, and of course, I'm not going to tell you the names, and tells me that they want me to be the Prime Minister of Israel, because they wanna be able to live in peace in Israel, the way Israel. The aisle we're taking right now, aisle that encourage the violent. Do not let the Arabs here who wants to live in peace do so. They understand that if we're not going to have here a leadership that deeply understand what we're doing here in this land, deeply create a clear message that this is the Jewish land, only the Jewish land. No one else will be able to take it away from us. There will be no peace over here.
But Arab ministers or Arab Israelis are saying that if you say that there will be peace. That's something.
Yes.
I mean, come on. I mean, there must be an understanding that the million.
I'll give you an example. I'm sure you heard about the name Hanin Zouabi.
Yes, I have. I mean,
okay.
To our audiences.
Hanin Zouabi has a nephew who came up, 16 years old. Okay, yeah, Arab youngster who came up on YouTube and everywhere, become very famous in the last summer, declaring that he is loyal to the state of Israel as a Jewish state. You know what happened to him? He cannot live in Israel anymore. His neighbors made his life so miserable. He had to leave the state of Israel. Why? Because the leadership of Israel did not do what I'm saying right now.
But if they
put your hand there, send a very clear message.
Mr. Feiglin.
This is a Jewish state.
If you say that this is a Jewish state, then let me ask you this: do you believe in the right of a Palestinian state to exist?
There is Palestinian.
A Palestinian state next to the state of Israel, a two-state solution.
When you say, well, let's make a fact very, very clear. When you're talking about two-state solution, I'm definitely against it. I'm in favor of.
Then how do you envision the peace that you're proposing?
It is very simple. The solution is one-state solution. Only the Jews control the Jewish state, the Jewish land, the land of Israel, the Holy Land that was given to us by God, God that all believers in Bible believe in the same God, and those who reads it know exactly who this land belongs to. Everybody can live here in Israel with us as long as they understand that this is the Jewish state. If they don't understand and fight against the basic sovereignty of the Jews on their land, then we are at war. If they do accept the full sovereignty of the Jews in their land, it can stay here and get all the human rights.
But then how do you propose for the people of Jerusalem, as we're seeing the sporadic violence of people who are living in East Jerusalem that do not see, it's not even the question of being, a Jewish state. They just want their own state, what they call, a future Palestine. What would you do with those people?
They have already 22 wonderful democratic Arabic states around. They can choose or create another one anywhere else they want, but not on the Jewish land.
Well, sadly, it's a solution that doesn't seem to be working for the Palestinian Authority. Don't we think, though...
If that's the case, we are at war. And we have to understand that and stop fooling ourselves. Since this concept of two-state solution came up 20 years ago in Oslo, we got 4 times more killing in the Middle East. We got only wars. We got more terror, not only here, but in the entire world. We should understand that this is the land of the Jews, only the Jews. Those who want to will live with us inside our land in peace will get all their human rights. But it's a Jewish state, it will never be any kind, and there will never be any kind of different sovereignty in our land, definitely not in our capital, definitely not in the middle of the capital, the Temple Mount, the holiest site for the Jewish nation.
Well, again, first of all, your opinions, we will agree to disagree, but I do thank you very, very much for being with us this morning, Moshe Feiglin, Knesset Minister of the Likud Party. When we get back, a different story. I Am Shimon Peres, Not Me. A new documentary film about the Israeli former president has been released this week. We'll take a closer look with its creator. First, though, let's hear some more of the morning headlines. Good morning. Thank you for staying with us. I-24 News Morning Edition. It is November 19th, and we turn to the bit of the show that actually has almost nothing to do with this death and destruction, and for that we're grateful. For 3 years, director and producer Naftali Glicksberg has been documenting former Israeli President Shimon Peres. He's asking the most intimate questions. The result is the film I Am Shimon Peres that premiered in Tel Aviv a few days ago. We have the honor, we're very happy to have in our studio Naftali Glicksberg. Also with me, of course, is Tony Grant, because he is a huge Shimon Peres fan. You don't understand.
Indeed.
It's like the biggest Shimon Peres fan is here.
Yeah. He can stand the line,
Guilty as charged. No, listen, I mean, the phenomena, the man, the Shimon Peres. How was it? But before anything else, let's take a look at a tiny bit from your film, I Am Shimon Peres, and take it from there.
Great.
Okay? There we go.
Everyone, please have a seat. Thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. I'm proud to announce that later this spring, I will invite Shimon Peres to the White House to present him with America's highest civilian honor, the Presidential Medal of Freedom.
When I was young, I thought for a lot of the time that I'd die by the age of 35. For some reason, it got stuck in my head, and this encouraged me to act with tremendous speed so I'd be able to achieve something.
Are you still afraid since the age of 35?
I guess I have already passed it. I'm through with this date.
No, I would say Naftali Glicksberg, who also has an English version of this film,
Yep.
which is very important to say. See, I stated it right now. Sadly, we did not know it, but you know, nothing takes away from the gravity, the gravitas. I'm crazy in love with Shimon Peres because I think he'll probably bury me. In many ways. But first of all, how did you gain access? How did you convince him to follow him for 3 years?
Since I'm handsome, so he agreed to give me.
You are very, very handsome.
Yeah.
Yes, very handsome man that you are. But seriously, you know, was it hard? Was it to, you know?
It was a difficult dialogue with him and his staff. I have negotiated with him almost in half year before I got an access, and because I had one condition, is that I have no limited access to the interviews, and no one can tell me what to ask and what not to ask, what to put in the movie, what to take out from the movie.
Final cut, as we say.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay.
Yep. And after a half year, I agree.
Now, how? When we say, you know, 3 years, you must have followed him through in really intimate situations, no?
Yeah.
Give me an example.
Some of them are out of the movie, of course.
Okay, like what?
They're out of the
They're
movie.
Out of the movie, not gonna discuss it. Like, oh, come on. Okay. A hint? Okay.
Yeah. I think that since the closest relationships that Shimon Peres have is with the staff, it's very interesting. As he said in the movie, when I was young, I was surrounded by eldest people. When I'm older, I'm surrounded by young people. So it's a kind of the story of Shimon Peres' life. He never belongs to the real group he has to be belong to. Am I clear enough?
Yeah. No. And, you know, 3 years with Shimon Peres, who I think we all know very well, but still he's an enigma to this. What makes Shimon Peres tick is what I'm wondering. This is a man who weathered many storms of the political, of actually the political history of Israel. We have to remind people he's older than Israel. You know, he's older than the state of Israel. And, you know, and he never stopped, you know, moving along. What do you think, because you were so close to him, makes him tick?
I will tell you a story.
Please.
When he first watched the movie, and it's not a simple movie to Mr. Peres to watch himself about 80 minutes.
Yeah.
And when it's finished, I asked him, how was it? He answered me, not so easy for me. And then I asked him, will you come to the premiere? And he answered, yes. I think that this is the power of Mr. Peres. He can confront every situation.
About himself, you mean? He can confront any situation?
About himself,
yeah.
yes. So if you can confront after someone tell you you are a loser, you can win every situation.
No, because and I'm glad you mentioned that, because many times through his political career, his foes, his competitors, you know, even people within the factions of the left said that he doesn't have what it takes to win the prime ministership of what basically back then was the Labour Party. But you say that he weathers that. Did he like the film? Come on.
I think that he thought that it is an amazing film.
Okay. Diplomatically stated.
Yep.
Okay.
I'm not sure that he liked the film, because it's very contradictory film, you know. It's portrayed Mr. Peres not in black and white colors.
Right.
So he didn't like the movie, but he thought that it's a very good movie.
No, that's a lot of strength. What surprised you about him? Is there something that you learned that surprised you that was, you know, that you didn't think about Mr. Shimon Peres?
Yeah. What surprised me is that it was very hard to ask a question that no one asked him before me.
I know you did. Come on, you know, how old is he? 90?
91. Almost 92.
Almost 92.
Yeah.
What, did you find one? Did you find a question that nobody asked him? I can't think of one. I think he's been asked everything.
You have to watch the movie.
Oh.
Then you will get the answer.
Brilliantly put. Okay. But did you find the answer? Just a hint.
Yep.
Okay. We will watch the movie. Everybody will watch the movie.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
No,
So
definitely.
we'll discuss it after you will watch it.
Okay. So he liked the movie, you said, or, you know, he was receptive to it. Reactions to the movie. I mean, what did you find when it comes to people? Because I think now, at this stage in Shimon Peres' life, it seems to be the consensus, and it wasn't that way in the past, for everybody to like him, isn't it?
Yeah, it's amazing because people that didn't like him before the movie called me after the movie and told me, you know, there is a human being behind this persona.
Nice.
So it's for me, it's a huge achievement that if you don't agree with his political attitude, there is still a human being behind this persona.
No, I love it. I mean, we're looking just at a little bit of footage from the film, and it seems very personal to see Mr. Parents organizing, you know,
small pictures.
Small pictures. Okay, let me put
tables,
that. You know, this is like being with my mother in the house.
Yeah.
This is crooked. Let me put that in place. Wow.
Yeah.
No, it's beautiful stuff. It's just a very humanizing in a way, very different from you know, a movie that we once saw. I don't know if you remember How I Stopped Being Afraid and Learned to Like Him, Ariel Sharon.
It's totally different.
It's
movie.
a totally different movie. Completely different. Yeah.
I had an access, and Avi Mugabe didn't have an access, real access.
True. That type of access. Do you think there'll be a sequel finally to this?
I don't know.
You don't know? Okay. I mean, amazing. I really urge everybody to see this. I think it's something that I personally am looking forward to see and was waiting for. Naftali, do stay with us because we locked you in the studio. Yes.
Guilty as charged.
Again, for the viral spiral that is the web review, Tony Grant, speaking about, okay, you're going to start with
cats.
something. Cats. Thank you.
You know, because no matter what, cats are always tearing up the internet. You know, it's not.
The world can blow up, but
the
cats will
are
prevail.
Still going to rule our lives online. And yeah, there's another epic cat video of sort of a telepathic cat. We can take a quick look.
Let's take a look. Let's take a look.
Just you've got to. It gets better.
That's the first. Is that the force? Was that the force? That was the force.
It's what so many of us want to do. Just get fed without actually cooking, or without
anything.
actually.
I always want to open the fridge and go. Yeah, here comes the Popeye. Naftali, yes, we do very seriously.
Yes.
And
check out Super Epic Cat at YouTube.
Yes.
It's about 2 minutes long. It's a big hit.
Yes. Thank you for that.
You're welcome. And of course, cats, to some people, are royalty, right?
As they should be.
So, of course, I wanted just to sum my serious thing about Queen Rania of Jordan, who we didn't get to earlier, but she did, at a speech she was giving in Abu Dhabi, she said that the anti-Islamic State fight is the key to saving Islam, and that silence towards these heinous acts that the Islamic State is committing is a gift to them. And I just want to say she's been speaking of having more support for the coalition airstrikes, because there has been some criticism of those actually within some of the coalition members.
The coalition of the unwilling in the messy situation that is. But you know, I'm glad that also as a woman, not just not just the wife, the spouse of a king in the region, that she's taking the stage and she's putting it also on her agenda, you know, and we love Queen Rania.
Yeah, we do. We don't hear enough of her.
Yeah, we love Queen Rania. Yeah, exactly. Okay.
So, but we do see a lot of, and we'll be seeing more of Will and Kate.
Really?
Yes, the Duke and Duchess of Cambridge are back in the news.
Yes,
they're going to be heading to New York soon.
Oh, thank God.
Yeah.
Isn't she pregnant? Do we know?
She is, and I'm not sure if baby Georgie there is going to be making the trip, but she is going to be with Prince William. They're going to be just 2 action-packed days of going to see a basketball game.
I want to talk a little bit about this picture real quick, and because I'm married to a bald man. Naftali, no offense. And I love my bald man.
We're talking
the hair. The hair.
You know
that picture.
I love it for its honesty.
No, it is. Reminiscent of his father. Yeah, very much. He's looking like a dad. He's looking like a dad.
I mean, the flip side of that is Donald Trump. Speaking of New York, and it's sort of just
roll with it.
And
it's very sexy, by the way, Naftali. Just so you know. There you go. Yes. Okay.
Speaking of New York. They're not going to see something that's actually being planned for New York, which is a hovering island in the Hudson River, which is a new project. We know about the High Line Park, which is famous and beautiful. Well, this is sort of like a conceptual extension of that, we could say. Apparently, British designer guy Thomas Heatherwick is planning a $170 million sort of floating, little manufactured island where Pier 55, I believe it is, which is on the Hudson, where
look at that.
Pier 54, actually, where the Titanic was supposed to dock way back when, but never quite made it. And this is kind of controversial because putting something like that in, it's artificial to the max, but some people are saying that it's...
That's very artificial to the max. I'm looking at it and I'm thinking of New York, and knowing New Yorkers, you know that within 2 years there'll be 2 high-rises on this thing.
They gotta, the pylons have to go really deep.
We can put some people here, look. Wow.
Anyway, guess who's also, who's spearheading the effort to get this done is Barry Diller, who, of course, is puts his money into a lot of New York causes, anyway, interesting to see if that will play out. The New York Magazine reports the New York Times has told its writers to ease up on comparing everything to Brooklyn. Yeah. Apparently, they're saying...
In a good way or in a bad way?
In a bad way. They're saying, what are we going to say? Kathmandu is the Cobble Hill of Nepal? They're saying it's just showing up to, everything. Brooklyn has got to stop being the measuring stick against which everything in the world is...
Brooklyn is also so Manhattanized,
Well, then there's that.
There's that, it's like the extension of so.
I think it's because probably so many staffers of the New York Times actually can no longer afford Manhattan, so they live in Brooklyn, so they compare whatever they're writing about to things in Brooklyn.
Okay.
There's Philadelphia. Did you hear about Philadelphia Jesus?
No.
Yeah.
There's a Philly Jesus?
Well, this guy, Michael Grant, he's not my brother, but...
and not a Jew.
Who knows about that?
Jesus was a Jew.
Yep. Jesus was a Jew. Jesus did many things, but he did not ice skate and ask for money.
Oh, my God.
Okay.
So wait, he's ice skating in Philly, dressed like Jesus, asking for money.
But the thing is, he's trying to raise awareness to drug issues as well because he's a former drug addict himself. And the thing is, he was arrested. I think he was let go, but he carries a cross when he goes around town.
I gotta say, I would actually compliment this guy and give him money because this is very original, as opposed to just doing
don't crucify him.
Exactly, do not crucify him.
It makes you wonder though, if you had say the Holy Land, people dressed up as Jesus, would that be a good or bad thing? I don't know.
That would be a horrible thing.
That would be, It works in Philadelphia.
Some of them do, actually. It works in Philly.
Yeah.
And one last one.
Of course, the Erdogan-Cuba mosque controversy continues.
Great.
A group in Turkey has said it's up to the Cubans if they want to put a mosque on a hill in Cuba, which may or may not have been cited by Muslim navigators centuries ago. Again, it's... going from a...
Yeah, no, because we don't have enough conflict.
Right, to bring the conflict to Cuba.
Exactly, let's move a conflict to Cuba. It's too quiet there as of late.
In Turkey, in the meantime, Martha Stewart's been causing controversy by buying fake handbags in the spice market. Or the bazaar.
Martha Stewart's in Turkey, folks. I should have opened the show with this.
I know.
Yeah.
She
buys fake designer bags in Istanbul.
She was promoting brand awareness, and then she goes buy fakes.
And takes a selfie with it. Okay, lovely.
Yeah.
Tony, as always, thank you for tuning us up. Naftali, amazing work. Seriously, I hope there's a sequel in tow. Yep. And do watch the movie. I am Shimon Peres. You guys out there, I-24 News Morning Edition. Do not forget to check us out on the web, Twitter, Facebook, and of course, join us tomorrow morning for another edition of the Morning Edition, the way you should be starting every single day of your life. There we go.